in essence, you're damaged by a plant-based low animal fat diet and 3 to 6 meals a day. And they cause a myriad of problems. Anxiety is so rampant. Depression, suicide, all these things are growing.
And that's food related, but it's also, I think, attitude related too. If you think about what you can get too often, it'll cause anxiety and depression. Because the most self-referential thoughts are not calming. That's not a calming thing to do.
We're in an artificial environment. We're fed a mindset that's damaging to our brains. I'm really excited today to be speaking with Tammy Peterson and talking about everything from faith, food, femininity, and family. Tammy, welcome.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for coming.
All things. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you immersed yourself in this carnivore world.
It was a long journey. You know, I had stomach aches from the time those are my first memories of stomach aches. And so I was always I was always wondering what was going on. So I always knew food had something to do with my trouble. So I had a pretty direct causal, it wasn't as psychological, really, although I did have fatigue.
Was this as a child? What age were you when you noticed this?
Oh, 3.
Wow.
Yeah, so really right out of the gate, I had trouble with my digestion. And my mom took me to the doctor once, but he didn't really have any answers for her. But that was in the 70s. It was quite a long time before everybody was looking at the microbiome as something that you might investigate. So I probably toyed with not necessarily an eating disorder, but nothing I ate made me feel good, so it was confusing. So, and I also got enough sugar in the form of candy, because we lived by a dairy that had, you could go to this little, like a Burger King kind of, you just go up to the window and get an ice cream cone or some penny candies. And so I'd take my dime or my quarter, probably once a week, and go over there and get something. And so sugar for me was definitely something that I was craving from a very young age. And I would find a way to get it, usually. And so my diet wasn't great as a kid. And I would snack on high sugar foods quite often. But by the time I was a teenager, I was starting to sleep quite a bit. And so I could sleep. I could go sit down to put my shoes on to leave, and I would fall asleep putting my shoes on. So I was really struggling. And when I first had my 2 kids, I would lay on the couch while they played around me because I had no energy.
Wow.
And but I knew, and I gave up sugar for a year, but I was still making cookies with no sugar in them. They're not very good if you make cookies with no sugar. And I gave up meat for a year. I was a vegetarian. That didn't help my symptoms at all. I wasn't any better. And then when I was 40, I had a morning where my son made whole wheat pancakes, and then my daughter made whole wheat pasta for lunch. And I was so exhausted after lunch that I slept. And it wasn't like sleeping. It was more like passing out for 2 hours. And I got up and I thought, okay, it must be wheat. And so I just took everything that had wheat written on it and on any can, and I threw everything away. And the next day I felt quite a bit better. And so I thought that I had the answer by then when I was 40. But Michaela when I was 40, she was 8. So she had already been diagnosed with arthritis. She was already on pretty strong biologic medicines to control the inflammation. But her toes would swell if she ate oranges. And so I went to the hospital and I told them when I was taking her to the rheumatologist, you know, if my daughter eats oranges, her toes swell. And they just kind of went, oh, huh. But nothing, no conversation or anything further. So they weren't at all aware of food being an important variable in treating arthritis. But we always knew. And so that summer when she was diagnosed, I called her grandparents because she was going to the lake. I said, no ice cream, no popsicles, you know. I mean, it's summer at the lake and I was just taking away all the sugary fun. And the grandparents, you know, they followed my advice, but I didn't have enough evidence to really make that stick. So as time went by, she continued to eat sugar and I allowed it because I didn't have enough evidence, but I continued, took her to naturopaths and she got pretty tired of that. And I didn't really find that much information, but I took her and we did an elimination diet. And then we had her a food panel done of 300 foods. She scored like red on all of them. Like she can't eat anything. And it was kind of shocking to see. And we thought, really, is this a reliable test that we've put her through? Because she has such a crazy panel of red here. And I, of course, was told that I couldn't eat lots of different things. And I believed it, but it wasn't everything. And so we didn't really take that seriously. We didn't know where to go with it, I don't think, to get more information. Jordan had looked up arthritis and fasting. And you can put arthritis into remission if you fast. Yeah, well, you got to eat something. And we couldn't figure out what it was that Michaela needed to eat and not eat to stay healthy, because it didn't seem to matter what kind of changes we made. She was still having trouble. Anyway, when she was older, I was down to meat and salad. And she was also down to pretty much meat and salad. And she had a baby, and I think the feedback she was getting from her baby, how happy her baby was, how well her baby slept, how well her baby was digesting, depended on what she was eating in some way. And so she started thinking about maybe some of the plants that she was eating might be causing some trouble. And then one of the carnivore doctors, she heard on one of their posts that you could just live on meat. And she thought, she had noticed that and then kind of put it aside, but then came back to it and thought, maybe I better try this. So she tried it, and then she called me and said, Mom, I think my arthritis is starting to settle down. And I just thought, oh, okay, because by then I had arthritis in my knees and my thumbs, and I couldn't go up and down stairs anymore, and I couldn't put my barrettes in or hold my husband's hand. Like I was not in good shape. And so I gave up the salad right away, and within 2 weeks, my knees began to loosen. And about 2 years later, my knees were fine. But it took about 2 years, actually, for them to heal. My thumbs, they're healed. But if I eat anything I shouldn't, I feel it in my thumbs right away. My knees, I don't really feel it in my knees. They're healed, but they're a much bigger joint, I think. And this is such a tiny joint that it was, I think, maybe more damaged by the plants, but they're still good. I can walk up mountains, and I can undo bottles and things I couldn't do before. And so I've been on this carnivore diet now since, I think it was January of 2018. So quite a while.
Wow.
And I have way more energy. I have no more arthritis. My digestion was still quite a bit of trouble still, so I hadn't figured that out. But I was still eating a little cheese in my carnivore diet. And then Michaela told me that she had my genetics done and said I had celiac disease. And if I couldn't eat grains, I also couldn't eat dairy, because that's part of the celiac diet. And so I stopped eating. I was having maybe a little bit of cheese on salad. because I had no bread or crackers or anything. So hardly any cheese, but I gave up the cheese. I was eating a bit of hard cheese, gave it up. And about a month later, I went to the gym. I guess I hadn't looked in the mirror for quite a while. And I put on my shorts and my t-shirt, and I went out on the gym space, and there's a big mirror, and I looked at myself, and I felt kind of naked because all of what might have been postmenopausal fat, maybe a little under my chin and under your arms and around your middle and in your thighs, it was all gone.
Wow.
Just from this little bit of cheese. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a surprise. And so that was quite a surprise. And I thought, well, I definitely can't, even though my digestion, because it was already a problem, I couldn't really tell whether it was making it worse. So I gave up cheese. So then I was totally on meat and water. And I stayed on meat and water, just steak and water and salt until the last couple of months. And now I've added eggs and nitrate-free bacon. And I seem to be able to eat those okay too. But I also went through this parasite and amoeba regime to try to clear my system out of anything that might be bothering me. And I feel a lot better now. So I'm about as healthy as I've ever been now.
Wow. Why do you think the medical system was unable to sort of see the problems that you had and your daughter had earlier? And she had all this panel testing, but somehow haven't been able to get to this idea that plants might be the culprit.
Well, when we did this was through a naturopath, and there was no communication between naturopaths and MDs. So I couldn't take the tests to the doctor and have them read them. There wasn't any communication between those two populations. That might have been helpful. That would have been helpful, I'm sure. But I don't think it didn't seem like doctors were at all aware of what nutrition does to health. And that was between 1998 forward to when Michaela when she gave up meat, she didn't even tell her doctors because they were monitoring how the drugs were doing for her, and they just told her, wow, the drugs are doing very well, but she didn't tell them that she was just eating a meat diet and that her symptoms were better. And then she gave up the drugs after that.
Is this a sustainable nutrition plan for you, your daughter,
my husband,
your husband, and for all of us, do you think?
Well, it definitely is sustainable for my daughter and her husband and myself and my husband. We're doing fine. I think my husband's a little bored with what he eats. He'd like variety in his diet, but I think he's pretty happy with bacon and eggs, so that'll keep him going for a while. But I feel very healthy. And when I get my nutrition tested and my vitamins tested, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. So I don't seem to be lacking anything because I'm not eating meat. Everything my micronutrient panel and hormone panels, they seem all right. So it's definitely something that I can live on as far as the lab tests show and how I feel. And that's pretty much all I know.
Are there any particular hardships that you've gone through on the carnivore diet and the transition that you can share?
Well, I started the carnivore diet in January of 2018, and I was diagnosed with cancer in October of 2018.
Wow. Can you share what type of cancer?
It was a kidney cancer. They told me it was renal cell carcinoma.
Wow.
And I went into surgery. I had surgery for it. They took out half my left kidney. And when I was in recuperation for the first 6 weeks, I got a back pain. And I told my surgeon that I had back pain, and he looked back at the biopsies and saw that there had been an indication of a Bellini tumor. And a Bellini tumor in the kidney is a very aggressive cancer. I'm not really familiar with the kidney, but there's the ducts. That's where the cancer was, or that's where the Bellini tumor is, and it's usually diagnosed after people die because it just spreads very, very fast. But mine had only spread to one lymph gland, just one. And so they went back in and took the rest of my kidney and all the lymph on this side because they were afraid that it was going to kill me. And it hadn't killed me. And so I think because I was only eating meat during that time that this disease could have gone all through my body, but it was slowed down because it's cancer is a metabolic disease, and it depends on what you eat, how fast it can grow, because cancer cells grow on carbohydrates. That's what they use for food to grow. And I wasn't giving it any carbohydrates. So it slowed it down enough that they found the cancer and they were able to take it out. And so that's the medical answer. That's the medical answer. But really, when I was diagnosed with cancer and I told my son that I had 10 months to live, I saw his grief, the grief in his eyes of a boy losing his mother.
Wow.
Even though I had loved him as any mother would love a baby, and I had maintained that love, and now he was 25. We'd had a very good relationship without any trouble, really. All the trouble that we had, Michaela was sick, right? That was all the trouble we needed in our family. And so my son he was a tough little kid, but we helped him to integrate his fierce will to integrate that, and he's become a very diplomatic person. And he was a very diplomatic teenager. And so we never had any trouble with him. We could really depend on him. And so then when I told him my trouble, his response to me, I trusted his response to me, that it was true and deep, that whatever he was feeling was something that I could really rest my soul on, that this is a really divine relationship that we shared. There weren't any earthly struggles in our relationship. So whatever I got from him seemed to be a very clear divine message. And the message, it just saved me from my own, which I came to believe later was doubt and cynicism about who I was and how worthy I was. As I was a little kid, my dad drank. My mom he had a good business and he took care of us. But he was also he was the most well-known person in our town, in our county, in our province. So he was a well-known, no matter where I went. Oh, you're Del Roberts' daughter. Yeah, I'm Del Roberts' daughter. We know him. Yeah, you know him. Because he was just this very bigger-than-life kind of salesman type guy who just loved people and had so much to do with everyone. And he was also a big civic person. So he was on the hospital board, on the school board, on the town council. He was just on the insurance board, on the real estate board for Alberta. He was always taking his part, as well as being an athlete. So he was curling provincially and golfing all over. And so he was quite a guy, a lovely person, really, but also really loved to party as well, which meant I didn't have the time with him that I needed as a child. I wanted to have more time with him and I didn't get it. So that was the trouble in my young life with my parents. My mom also, we didn't find out until she was gone, really, that her father died at 56 with colon cancer and had probably suffered from depression his whole life. And so might have not been as nurturing a father as she would have needed. And so she was a little bit distrustful of my dad for no apparent reason. But as a child, I wouldn't have understood all those things until I was much older. And so as a child, I felt some necessity to leave home and to get away from them, thinking I wouldn't take any of my problems with me. Of course, you take everything you take everything with you wherever you go. So it's not that easy, right? It's not that easy. And that's not how you change.
Yeah.
But eventually, with this trouble with my arthritis, when I felt the Holy Spirit really fill my body, and I felt this overwhelming calm, and realized that I had no agency in terms of my life, that my life was given to me by God and it would be taken from me by God. And so I didn't actually have to worry about that anymore. All I had to do was be grateful to the doctors who are going to be taking care of me, and be grateful for the time I had to be in service to my family still, because I was still there. So I could be in service to my family by being grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel a necessity to be bitter or worried even, because now it wasn't my story in particular. I was playing out my role, but my story is given to me and I'm not writing it. I'm listening to it and trying to follow whatever it is that's shown to me as the next right thing on my, path to heaven, really. And I just noticed that at that moment. I think I'd spent years wondering what it was, what am I here for, When I was traveling with Jordan, I spent the whole year on tour asking what I was doing there. So I was really asking, I was really searching, what am I doing here? And I think at that moment, God said, see, you're here because I love you. You're here because I love you, and I'm going to take care of you. And so I wasn't even worried whether I was going to live or die, really. It just wasn't my story. That's not my story. My story is, what can I do for my son to love him and to inspire him to be the best he can be?
And you're given this diagnosis. Maybe you can touch upon how faith in God has inspired you on this journey and how you got there.
Yeah, well, I had that beginning of distrust in my family. And then not only that, but I was very strong-willed and thought I knew what was best in life. As a teenager, I smoked pot when it was offered to me.
Mm-hmm.
I went out late with my friends. We used to, like every night of the week, well, as far as I remember, it was probably Friday nights. Friday nights, we'd be driving around and the police would stop us and we'd have to pour out all our beer. And that happened every Friday. Because we were in a town of 2,000 people. It was a very small northern town. There was lots of oil and gas. There was lots of money. And that's why there were lots of drugs up there. And everybody had a car because there was no taxi service. There was no bus service. You got around if you had a car or a horse or you walked. That was it. That's what we had. And so I was, my dad, he was pretty good. He told me to be careful that if I went to a party, to make sure I got home, and that was my responsibility. So he's very good at teaching us that it was our responsibilities. So I'd go on these crazy Friday night parties in the bush with a campfire that were 30 miles away. And we'd watch the sun start to come up and then we'd drive home. But I would sit by the driver. I never had a car, so I'd sit by the driver and make sure he didn't go in the ditch on my way home, because my dad told me I had to make sure I got home. So he was good. At least he gave me that I had to be responsible. But I took that responsibility very seriously, and I made sure that I got myself through university, that I buckled down and did 4 years and put myself through a kinesiology degree, and that was good. And at the end of that, I decided, though, I didn't want to become a physiotherapist or a nurse or a doctor for that. I wanted to touch people, so I became a massage therapist. And I had actually gone into university after starting yoga when I was 13. My godmother taught me yoga, and when I went to university, I thought I was very interested in sports and teaching, and I thought, what does yoga have to do with, because with university, because they're not offering this type of sport. They're offering football and swimming and basketball and golf and all these, but not yoga. So, but I kind of kept that in my heart, that yoga seemed good. It seemed good to me, but how does it answer to my education? But I studied kinesiology, which was sports. It was exercise physiology, so you could really understand the biochemistry to if somebody exercises at the North Pole or they exercise in the tropical area and how that changes. It was fascinating. It was fascinating work, how you could psychologically, in sports psychology, how you could, harness your mind to get yourself prepared for a race so that you could win. And then psychomotor learning, how children develop. And all. So it was very interesting and broad kind of almost a philosophy of the body, psychology of the body, and physiology of the body. We did biomechanics, so how you could develop tools to use that were in keeping with your biomechanics. And so I was interested in all of that stuff. But when I came out, I thought massage therapy, and I became a massage therapist. And I listened. So that's where I learned to listen, I think, mostly was in massage therapy, because you got to you're touching someone, and you're trying to find where there's trouble, and they're telling you where there might be trouble. And so it's a conversation, but it's more on their end and more on my end to listen. So how many years of that? Must have been about 20 years of that I did that. And at the end of that, I got arthritis. And I couldn't do massages anymore. So I thought, oh, well, what am I going to do? So 6 months, I just kept asking, what am I going to do? And at the end of that, I thought, my husband looks like he needs some help. So I said, do you need some help? Yeah, well, he thought he might need some help, but didn't know exactly what I could do. But I said, well, I'm here, if you need help. It was probably a week later that he made that video that went viral, that when he came down one morning to me and he said, my clinical clients, they're telling me that they're being hassled at work by politically correct policies. And now they're asking the university people to answer to these DEI policies. And I'm going to have to say something. It's just, it's not just at the airports now that they're being authoritarian. It's in many different places. And I'm going to have to say something publicly. And I said, you've been talking to me about this stuff for 30 years. I said, why don't you talk to people publicly? I said, let's see what happens. And of course, that afternoon, I was there, and there were journalists lined up outside. There were journalists in the living room with him, and there were journalists on the phone with me, and I was there. And so we handled that, because it was quite an onslaught of questioning who he was and whether he was telling the truth or whether he had ulterior motives. They were looking for arterial motives. I felt like they were going to burn down our house. Like, it was not an easy time, but I wasn't distracted by the massages that I was doing. For once in my life, I wasn't concentrating on what I wanted to do. I was concentrating on being there for my husband. And so that was a turning point in my life, that I had realized that I could be, even though my knees were no good, my hands were no good, the physical, it was like God gave me this problem to stop me from using my physical abilities to solve my problems. He said, no, I'm going to take that away from you. I mean, my digestion still was no good, but now my knees and my hands were no good either. And so I'd like to do a lot of art, but I couldn't hold on to the paintbrush anymore. Like I was getting more and more limited by what I could do. And I needed that so that I would stop and look and see and listen. What can I do to be helpful in a whole new way? And I thought, well, maybe I can be helpful to my husband. So I can make the space and he can do whatever he has to do. And then that started us on a different quest. And it was the quest of calling up what seems to be a problem and trying to answer that with ethical answers. Maybe this is God's plan in some way. Maybe we can answer this by prayer and seeing what comes to us. Inspiration, like I needed deep inner guidance. I'd been kind of taken back from the world with my arthritis, which was good. I needed that.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to be taken back so that I would look within to see what was important. Does that answer your question?
Pain
Pain. Oh yeah, definitely pain.
pushes us
Yeah.
until the light pulls, and we don't see it without the pain that he gives us.
Yeah. And I was tough, right? I motored through all the trouble I had with my digestion. I never let it stop me. Before I had my first child, I had a cyst on one of my ovaries that became as big as a grapefruit. It grew. They told me it was cancer, but it was actually a dermoid cyst. So it had hair and teeth and skin in it. It was like a twin that didn't get born.
Another plant problem.
Another plant problem. Yeah, my aunt had the same problem. How is that a plant problem?
Well, plants are tumorigenics.
Mm-hmm.
They contain substances that elicit abnormal DNA expression. And so they're growth factors. So if you go back to goiters, a goiter is a damaged thyroid gland.
Yeah.
Well, there are infinite plants that are fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, soy, all sorts of things that we know damage the thyroid gland. And they cause tumors, cysts, enlargement, dysfunction, damage, and ultimately death to the organ. Well, why would the thyroid gland be the only gland that it attacks? So ultimately, you just think of a disease. It's all secondary to plant damage in different cells of our bodies, and which is a difficult thing. Why do we doctors, why are we so resistant to this possibility? I always ask.
Yeah, I had my tonsils out when I was 20.
Yeah.
No, when I was 9. I had my appendix out when I was 20.
So if you think about it, the wisdom teeth, tonsils, adenoids, appendix, gallbladder, and all the things, the ear problems that children are having are upper respiratory. Once again, the plants and the microbes are infecting. And you had mentioned about parasites.
Yes.
And ultimately, our body is a culture dish.
More than we like to believe.
That's correct. And the microbes are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting rid of them is impossible, because even if you take antibiotics,
they'll come back again.
They come back.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your religious philosophy. And maybe you can help tell us your story a little bit about how that I was raised Catholic, and I live a philosophy of basically the Catholic Church. I'm wondering how that has shaped your life and your current life, and you're a guide of life. You're a guide. You mentioned aim high, and helping others, and tell us how your Catholic Christian philosophy has shaped all of that.
So when I first went to church,
Yeah.
Protestant church, I walked into the church and wondered, where's Mother Mary? Turned out my grandmother was Catholic. She didn't tell us that. But I did find out when I became a Catholic that my grandmother had been Catholic, and she changed her religion because her husband was Protestant. So she left the religion. But somewhere deep inside me, I was still Catholic, I think, right from the beginning. So, it might have been, well, kids, they're searching for answers and they have questions. And one of my questions was, where's Mother Mary? And when my daughter was very, very ill and my mom had died of dementia, I prayed to my mother all the time. And I know now I was praying to what was best in my mother, which is Mother Mary, right? So I think I've been praying to Mother Mary my whole life, not knowing that I was praying to her. So when I was in the hospital, a friend came with a rosary, a Catholic friend, and she wasn't even that good a friend, really. I'd met her a couple of times. She had only really come to our house because she was working with another political candidate who was trying to change the school system and get it away from these woke ideologies and have a more family-based understanding of education. And so she came to our house hoping that Jordan would help with their political endeavor. But then after that, I didn't really see her. Now and then she'd leave a can of maple syrup on my doorstep or something. So her name would come back now and then. So when I was in the hospital and I got an email and her asking if she could come and visit, I said yes, I knew who she was. So she showed up and she said she had a rosary and she had one for me. And she had a little portrait of Mother Mary with baby Jesus. And she was Asian, so it was an Asian Mother Mary and an Asian baby Jesus, which was really cute. And so I put that on my bedstead and I said, well, I don't know how to pray the rosary. And she took that as an invitation and she began to pray the rosary with me. And she came every morning at 10 for 5 weeks and prayed the rosary with me every day, which I thought was a great service of sacrifice that she made for me. And I really appreciated it because I didn't know. After I had the surgery and they took out my lymph and my kidney, they left a hole in my lymph and all my fluids drained into my feet. And so over months, they couldn't find the leak. And so I continued to have all my vital fluids leaking into my body. And she continued to come to the hospital every day. And the hospital eventually found a doctor in the States who they thought might be able to find this leak. And she asked me if I wanted to be blessed by a priest, a friend of hers. And I said, yes, I definitely did. So he came and he blessed me and he told me to pray on gratitude. And he gave me the St. Jose Maria Novena for the Sick, which is a 9-day prayer in the Catholic Church. And so I took those prayers and I began to pray them. And when I got down to Pennsylvania, they did surgery on me and they couldn't find the leak. They put dye into my lymph system and filled me up with dye, and they had a big MRI screen to see where the leak would be, and they couldn't find it. But they told me in 5 days they were going to cut me open and look, and I thought, God, that sounds like a bad idea, because the lymph system is like a spider web, and it's like, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? I didn't have a lot of hope for that, but I had been praying, and it was the 5th day of prayer, and it was Sunday, and they were going to do surgery on Monday. So I ate some fat just to see if this bag that was on my hip would have any cloudiness in it. Because if you eat fat and there's cloudiness in it, it means your lymph system is still leaking. But I ate a whole egg, and I looked in the bag, and there was no cloudiness. And I thought, well, what do I know about medicine. I don't know anything about medicine. So the next morning, the resident and the head nurse came and said, "You're going to have to do a fat challenge." And I said, "Well, I did last night." And I showed them the bag, and the bag was clear. And they said, "Well, if there's no cloudiness in the bag, then the hole is gone and you're better. And we'll let you out of the hospital." So half an hour later, they took out my IV. I had a TPN diet that was right into my heart because we were letting the lymph system rest.
Wow.
It wasn't helping, didn't help, but I had all these interventions over the months. You know, this bag off my abdomen, took all those out, and I went over to the Airbnb where my mother-in-law was there, and my sister-in-law and her children, my son and his wife and my husband. They were all there with Team Tammy shirts on. My sister-in-law's a nurse, so she
Wow.
knows how to make a patient feel good. She also put prayers, stuck them up on my wall so that I had those prayers while I was in the hospital for 5 weeks. I'd wake up and there they were, all these lovely prayers from people to tell me to care, you know, that they cared, really, that they loved me, right? So that was very helpful. Anyway, this day I went back there and I looked at my phone, and that day was our anniversary. It turned out that 3 months before that, when I was in the hospital and going to pray every day with my friend, I'd come back to the hospital room and Jordan would be asleep in the bed because he was actually not very well either. And I would think, oh, you should be in the hospital, but here you are by my bedside because I'm sick. So we were both very, very sick, but I was the one getting medical care. And one day I was feeling bad that he was feeling bad about me. And I wondered what I could say that would calm his heart. And I said, you know, I think by our anniversary, the doctors will have it figured out. You know, one way or another, I'll have a shunt up to my heart or something. They'll have it. So they'll have me sorted. And that was the day that I got better. Unbeknownst to me, unbeknownst to anybody, that was August 19th. That was the day I got better. That was our anniversary. And I had told him that 3 months earlier, that I was going to be put together by that day, which was it was something that was hard to explain. It was hard to explain in any kind of in any kind of logical discussion. It had to be a divine intervention. It seemed that it did, because I mean, these kind of things can happen and there's medical reasons for it, but why that day? That was the question. Why that day? Why the day that I said it would happen 3 months before? That's just hard to explain away. And I thought, you know, God was giving me a nudge to nudge my husband into his own faith. Say, look, see, saved your wife on the day she said so, which was pretty, amazing. It was an amazing day for all of us.
Did you find yourself with the daily rosary prayers? Did it open up a sort of a new belief system?
Well, you know,
or a
over time, I became, not very much time either. Over time, I wanted to know more and more about what was in the gospel story. You know, and so it definitely brought me closer to wanting to understand the stories, the biblical stories behind the rosary. So I think that the rosary definitely, if you pray it every day, it does bring you closer to Jesus Christ. There's just, that's the story. It's the story of the birth of Jesus Christ to his crucifixion. That's the story. And so you pray to Mother Mary in the rosary, but it's for intercession to Lord Jesus Christ. So I eventually wanted to start a podcast, and I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? Well, what do I do? Well, I pray. That's what I do. So let's talk about prayer. And what first should I talk about? I should talk about the rosary. And so I began to invite guests on my podcast to talk about the rosary and the meaning behind it. And then through that investigation, because I was talking to Jonathan Pajot, who's an Orthodox icon carver, and he said, you have to go to church. He said, you need that community, you have to go to church. This isn't going to work unless you go to church. And so I thought, okay, church, what am I going to do? Am I going to become an Orthodox, or I'm going to go into the Catholic Church? I'm not going to go into the Protestant Church. I was there, and I found it wasn't as profound as what I need. I need some more. I need more of a routine, and the Catholics give a good routine. I need scripture. So I really want a traditional church service. I want a traditional understanding that's really in keeping with the Holy Bible. That's what I want. And so as time went on, more and more Catholics kept coming into my life. Priests and mostly priests that were coming into my life. And then I started getting asked questions about my faith. And I said, you know, it really looks to me like the Catholic faith is calling me in that direction. So then I talked to Queenie, my friend, and I said, do you know of a priest, because I'm traveling all the time, that would follow me through the Catechism? And so she found a priest that lived actually had his parish very close to my home in Toronto.
Wow.
And he said he would follow me and do weekly Zoom meetings with me individually and take me through the Catechism. And then at Easter, I was done, and I went back and I was confirmed in the Catholic Church. And he asked me if I had any hesitation. I had no hesitation. I had no questions, really. When I first started the Catechism, and you acclaim your Jesus Christ as your Savior, that kind of took me back a bit, because it was very blunt and straightforward. So it took me, I don't know, a few weeks anyway. But the more I prayed the Rosary and studied the Catechism, the easier that became, until it was just, I was ready. I was ready.
What are your thoughts about the Rosary and that prayer every day? Where do you think this is all? Where's the spark? What's the thing, do you think?
Well, you know,
Is it,
I meditated and did yoga from the time I was 13 till I was 55 every day. So I had a practice, right? I had a practice. So when I started to pray the Rosary, I just replaced my practice really of meditation with prayer and meditation, which later, much later, I was reading, I can't remember what book that Thomas Merton wrote, and in it he said meditation is to be done with prayer. And I thought, oh yeah, of course it is. I didn't realize that when I was a child and had this practice that was in yoga, in the yogic tradition. But it's one thing to focus, say you focus your mind on one thing, say you focus your mind on a candle, and so then you clear your mind of the busyness in your mind. But what then? If that's all you do, then what do you think of when you stop meditating? And that's what happened to me. It was like would continue to have worry. I would continue to have resentment or fear. You know, I'd continue to have these things. And when I read Thomas Merton, I thought, oh, I see. Meditation is meant to be done with scripture. That's what he said. I said, oh yeah, you have to clear your mind of your busy thoughts and direct it to the divine. That's what meditation and prayer are, and they're to be together. Whatever your religion is but to direct your intention to God and to take that into your day. And so it was after all of that Rosary praying, and then quite a bit of podcasting on the divine feminine, good and bad, because there are horrible things that happen to children. So you have to also talk about those things. So I had to come to the realization that I had to talk about what was evil as well as what was good, if I was going to take everything into consideration that the divine feminine would be about. And through all of that investigation and learning, I came to realize that prayer, it was the intent, it was the intention that is necessary, and I have to bring myself to that intention purposefully through prayer. And it has to be every day.
Can you tell us a little bit about the divine feminine, the divine masculine?
Well, the divine feminine, I'm understanding, is setting a space. So creating a space of calm and acceptance and possibility. Because, the divine feminine is, we're life-giving. Women are life-giving. And so it's the space that it's the humility in accepting the gift from God, which is your baby. It's in the acceptance of this, of making space in your life for babies and a husband that allows a man to do things that are difficult, that he's responsible for, and in keeping with his love for his family, that it gives him the courage to go out and conquer, really. And it's up, and the woman, I think we give space for our children in a confined space, a comfortably confined space, to explore and to develop and to find what is compelling and meaningful in their lives, with offering, but not with compel. You don't want to direct your children. You want to offer to your children, and they will explore what calls to them. Yeah, so it's a very hands-off type of the divine feminine. I think is a very hands-off situation, and when people put their hands on, that's when the divine feminine goes sideways. And I'm talking about child trafficking. I'm talking about pedophilia, these very nasty and destructive practices that people have. They're the divine feminine, in the Disney stories, when she goes bad, she turns into a dragon. Yeah, so the divine feminine can be a dragon. You want to be aware of that so that you make sure that that's not your direction. Because it can easily come that, you have a child and you want the best for your child, and you want to keep your child safe, but if you get too hands-on about their safety, you can smother them. And if you get too hands-on about how, their direction, then you take away their own joy and feeling of meaning in their life if you're the one who's guiding that. So you have to be really careful as mothers that we keep the space, but we don't get our hands in there too much. It's a very delicate balance.
Do you think our current lifestyles and environment has changed the roles of the feminine?
Oh, yes, I think they have, because I think, women have left the home and they've left their communities and they've gone out to work. So that has definitely left the home. And so families are breaking up. And there are a lot of single mothers and single fathers. And so the family has been broken up because the space wasn't being kept. So because the space wasn't being kept, because the community wasn't being minded and cared for and paid attention to, really it's attention, intention and attention, really, in the communities and in the homes. When women have been told, through the feminist movement, really, that they are, whatever it is that they desire, they can have. And I've learned that it isn't what I have, it's what I can offer. So it was the wrong message that feminists gave women, because you can have whenever you want, is a self-serving the idea,
Mhm.
and it leads you to being more, giving more attention to what you want, and not paying enough attention to what's being offered in front of you to act on. And if you're not paying attention to what's being offered and acted on, if you're only paying attention to yourself, then those signals aren't being paid attention to. Then what was supposed to happen doesn't happen, and what does happen was not supposed to happen. So it doesn't go the right way.
Do you think, we talk about diet in all this, and how diet could affect our feminine and masculine selves? Sort of what's happened in our communities, where we're seeing the masculine show up in the feminine show up in the masculine, destroying our families and relationships in so many ways. Do you think our diet has anything to do with that?
Well, that would be a good thing to investigate, that's for sure. Seeing people change their identities. And, I've seen people with brain cancer. I had a cousin with brain cancer who changed her identity. That's not helpful. I think more of a challenge than, she already had a challenge. And then that's another challenge on top of that, which makes that complicated and difficult. And I think that, an answer of changing your identity when you're feeling, and I think eating all these carbohydrates makes our minds fuzzy. So I think it makes us less sharp.
Mm-hmm.
I think it less aware of our surroundings and what's going on. And so I think that eating, especially all these processed plants, then they aren't even the plants that they were. But, right off the get-go, plants are in themselves a problem. They were always a problem for me. And people don't think that they're a problem, but, so my husband had depression, so he didn't think it was food.
Yeah.
Turned out it was. When he changed his diet, his depression went away. So we think that plants aren't a problem.
But maybe they are.
But we don't know all of the, I might have, like I told you, I had this cyst on my ovary.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that was caused by food. But
Well, you go back
it very
to
much could be.
the birth control pill,
Yeah.
hormones, both male hormones and female hormones, are maybe overly prescribed and used. And back to the plants, which are the origin of the birth control pill. And so if the plants damage your reproductive system, and now you suddenly find yourself with low testosterone or low estrogen, and then it may certainly completely create an imbalance in your hormones.
Yeah, well, I took the birth control pill. It made me quite depressed. I couldn't take it.
And it's still one of the drugs that is highly prescribed, and that is likely a major factor in our outward expression of our lives, either our feminine or our masculine. And so we're seeing the role reversals.
Yeah, we're seeing role reversals. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on carnivore? Maybe.
Well, I think it clears our minds. It would be worth trying that first before drugs, and much easier on our pocketbooks, because drugs are very expensive and they're very big money makers. And so we could take that away and start offering people very simple fat-based diets to see whether some of their problems straighten out. They might. It's worth a try.
Is the sexual revolution been a plus or negative for our societies, do you think?
Well, there's always good with bad.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, there's always there's hardly ever a perfect solution that is all good. Although often the side of it that you wouldn't say was positive is challenging, and maybe we need those challenges. So because our religion is based on sacrifice, right? So I feel that this carnivore diet is a constant sacrifice, because all I eat is one thing and all I drink is one thing. Then I sacrifice everything else. But what does that do, all that sacrifice? Well, it gives me a lot more time. I have a lot more time to devote to doing what I can to be of service to mankind, right? So I really feel like this diet is an opportunity just waiting.
How much shopping do you do? Preparing food,
None.
meals, they're all gone.
None. 15 minutes I have a steak, and 10 minutes later I've eaten, and that's it.
So you're no longer living to eat, but eating to live, and that
Exactly.
and that's all we need.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your podcasting, and you're putting out these ideas, and what's your motivation? What's your dream in this?
Well, I think it seems to me that we need older women. It would be good for us to speak up. I have a friend in the UK. She's a Anglican priest in the UK. She's got a podcast, and she's just started the podcast, and she's just realized now that she wants to talk about what girls want, because she realizes that she's not yet a grandmother, but she's in her 50s, and she feels that she felt like maybe there wasn't much she had to say, but now she's realizing, oh no, maybe it's my responsibility to talk about what I've learned through my life as a woman, because these young girls, young women, in our political system we talk about left and right, but we're getting so we can talk about women and men, women on the left and men on the right. It's starting to show that way in our political investigations. They're showing that women are on the left and men are on the right. So when you go conservative, you get men that are voting for that. And when you go left, it's women who are voting for that. And so I want to try to bring those men and women together again. And I feel a responsibility to my young self even, to make amends with my young self. I didn't treat myself perfectly when I was 18 years old. I probably would have been better off to be married when I was 18 and starting a family than I was going to university. And I always would have had a drive to learn, so I wasn't going to not learn, but putting off family meant I only had 2 kids where I would have liked to have more. And so I'd like to talk about these things and share this with people, because I think young women they're quite separate from men, and they're, when young women say, I can't find a good man. Well, what makes a good man in terms of a woman? When a woman marries a man that gives him the opportunity to love and care for her, and to offer to care for her, so she can care for her baby and he can support her. And that gives him the reason to do difficult things. Well, why should a man do difficult things if there's nobody to take care of? Like, what's the motivation? And so I think that they're getting separate because we're not making this sacrifice of our individual desires. We got to put ourselves forward as a partner in a marriage, serving the children that we will have, because there is nothing better than the love of a baby. There's nothing better than that. And my kids now, they're parents themselves and they have children themselves. And I'm very grateful to them for taking on this adult role that they have taken on with all of the responsibilities that it takes to be a man providing for his family and all the responsibility it takes for a woman to get pregnant and have children and for them to raise those kids together. And now for me as a grandmother to be of service in the wisdom that I have learned to help inform and support them, you know, and that's family. You know, that's the ideal of family. There's going to be lots of people who don't fall into that ideal and, you know, who don't rise exactly to the same place as someone who has a traditional family with grandparents and aunts and uncles and all of that, which is best. That's best. But people can still, they can still strive for that ideal and do what they can to be accepting and also grateful for whatever they can attain, really, and how close they can come to that. Because we all fall short of that in some way. But we can still have an ideal, just like we do in our religion. Our monotheistic religion, there's an ideal. Well, none of us are God, and none of us claim to be God. So why think that we have to be perfect? But does that stop us from the challenge and the adventure of trying to get as close as we can?
Is the concept of God really a goal of all good, but there is imperfection within it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Every morning, that goal, and every evening being forgiving yourself from not reaching that goal and going to sleep and starting again the next day.
So the proper human diet,
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts? How would you describe that for most of humanity?
I can really only talk about my relationship, my family, and what we eat. But I see people who are overweight, very young, maybe 21, and very overweight. And I don't shy away from telling them who I think they could be. So I was talking to one of the political helpers for RFK. It was his nephew, and he's a very tall young man, but he was quite heavy. And I met him a couple times, and then I went up to him and I said, you know, we're in an important time in history, and you're playing a part, and you have to be the best you can be in this part you're playing, and you could be formidable. I said, because you are, I don't know how much taller than him. He had to be 6'5". He was a very tall guy. And I said, you could really be formidable and clear-minded so that you can see exactly what's being called for you to do. And then having the courage to do it. I said, you want to, it's not about what you want. I said, it's who you can be and what service you can offer. And in doing that, it doesn't matter if you want to eat ice cream. That has nothing to do with it, because what you want has nothing to do with who you are, because you're a piece of a puzzle that you're trying to put together all in the right place. And so that's everything. What you want is a distraction. It's actually a distraction. And so if you would take yourself back to just eating this one thing, this will be an opportunity for you to get your metabolism all corrected out your mind clear, and then in this political game that you're playing, you will be a formidable component in the ring. And that's all that matters. And so that's what I told him. And often that will ring true for people.
People don't know the story. They know the direction. They're living on a propaganda of an improper human diet, which is plant-based, which keeps us weak and meek, and keeps us fighting to change. But you can't change easily on that standard regimen that we've been taught.
No, it makes you too tired, and it makes you not as sharp. You know, when I was 40, I was starting to forget words and maybe forget trains of thought. And that night that I had that pasta and then gave it up, the next day I was already clearer. And I thought, oh no, look at how much trouble I was in, and how easy it is to have let that go and now be so much clearer. So that was really a real beginning.
Oh boy, I thought I turned it off.
That's not what it thought.
No, it didn't. I turned all the other stuff. Go ahead.
Well, I can't remember what we were talking about.
Well,
Another question.
how do we give power to our brothers and sisters to hear the story, to see the changes, to inspire?
Well, I pray for those. I pray every day for those I want to have God's love, you know, centered on them, and for them to recognize that. But that's why I have a podcast, and that's why I speak out publicly, is because I hope that somebody will hear something in what we say and will think, oh, maybe there's something that I could do for myself that would be helpful in helping me be a more effective citizen of the country. And I think this diet has quite a bit to do with it. Because once you have a good sleep and a clear mind and no ups and downs of insulin making you go up and down, you know, because after this plant-based diet, your insulin levels climb until you have diabetes and heart disease and dementia. You know, we don't need that. We don't have to do that. We can just have a very strict plant-free diet, and who knows what we can do with that and how we can turn things around and how much we can support one another, because we'll have the energy to do it. We're just, I think, lacking a lot of energy now.
I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and it was a lot of grains and plant-based. And I know what it did to me, I believe. And however we can help change the world and teach our parents and their children to change their world is, I think, to see what we see at our young ages in our 60s. And social media. What's your opinion on social media?
Well, I'll tell you something. So my daughter has this Peterson Academy, and they have a social media component on it.
Yeah.
And you have to be a student in Peterson Academy to use the social media. And they were having some trouble on the social media. There were people who were causing trouble in the comments repeatedly on other people's feeds. And they watched it for some time, not knowing exactly, you know, how to deal with this. And then after months of observing this, they decided that they would take those people off the platform and give them all their money back. And those people weren't happy, obviously. But then the social media was working way better. And they had something like, they had tens of thousands of people and only 15 people that they had to give their money back to, and things started to go way better again. So I think what's going on with social media is there are no limits. There's no gatekeeper. There, everything is free. And so anybody can say anything. And actually you can say things under many, many different names. So you can be one person and have as many social media names as you want. And then you can influence what other people are talking about with no repercussions because, well, they don't know who you are. You can be anonymous. And so then you can say whatever you want, but still your words are going to land on other people's feeds and they're going to influence what people are thinking. And so we have to think really carefully about what we're doing with social media because it's very difficult for people, because people are paying attention to social media and interacting with it, and especially young women are looking at it to reflect back on, are they being an effective and maybe even perfect person, because there's all these people who portray themselves as perfect people online, and and it's just a snippet of who someone might be, and everybody knows that a snippet of what someone might be is very narrow. That's a very narrow window, and when you see that as truth, then there's a lot missing. So there's a lot missing, and so you're taking your story. Your story is limited. And if you're taking that as truth, then that's not going to lead you in the right direction. So we have to be very careful. This social media experiment that we're having on PA is showing us that you can have social media, and it can be a good place, a good community that is helping to listen to one another and to help to find help each person find their way to a better place. We're finding that, but it took some discerning, right? It took some discernment to say yes to this and no to that. That's not helpful. That's hurtful. That's harmful. It's not helpful. Discernment. We don't have enough discernment on social media, I don't think.
Although I know in our community, in general, there's a mostly positive, but then there's those little things. And in general, I think most people sort of kind of help push those away. And I'm wondering if as we speak more and support more positive, we sort of will help that grow, and knowing that there's always that little bit out there.
Well, we have to know that there's a fringe, right?
Yep. It's the bad apples.
Yeah, well, the Jews, and they have those little strings around them. That's the fringe, right? That's the fringe, and you have to be aware that there is a fringe. But that doesn't mean that you don't honor the center. And the center in our societies is family. That's a center. That's the gold. That's what you pray for. And although you might fall away, and we all do to some extent, that doesn't say that you don't still strive for that.
Do you have any favorite books?
Do I have any favorite books? Oh, I read lots of books. Well, the Bible is my favorite book, I guess. It is. Yeah, the Bible is my favorite book.
The New Testament?
The New Testament is easier to read than the Old Testament. So I tried to start with the Old Testament a number of times, and then I decided that I would read one chapter in the New Testament and pray the Rosary every morning, and that actually worked very well. I'm well through the New Testament, so after I'm done that, maybe I'll try the Old Testament again, but I found that it was very helpful to start with.
So what is your daily practice?
I get up in the morning and I read a chapter on my phone, because I have the Bible on my phone, because I travel all the time. I need that. So I read a chapter on the Bible, or I go to Mass. I might go to Mass. And so I take whatever it is that you learn, whatever the sermon is about, and meditate on that. And also to put it maybe into chat GPT if I don't understand it, to get more understanding of what the sermon was about. I can do that. That's also very helpful. Anyway, I do that. So I might have a chapter that I focus on for that morning, and then I might discuss it too with the people that I'm with. And then I pray the Rosary, and I pray the Rosary for different intentions. I have people who ask me to pray for them. But I pray for, my son, and I pray for all young fathers, and I pray for my brother. I pray for old grandparents. And so I pray for Justin Trudeau, and I pray for all politicians, so I try to have a local prayer as well as a universal prayer with every decade. And by the end of that, I have my whatever, if there was any preoccupation in my thoughts, then I've dealt with that, given that to God, and have asked for it to be lifted from me, so that for the rest of the day, I know there will be challenges in the day, and I hope that I can be as centered and as loving as I can be during the day. And, and that, I think that prayer in the morning, that helps me to focus and get everything ready for the challenges of every day.
How about your meals?
How about my meals? Well, we have been having bacon and eggs in the morning, but this is new, so it's kind of a novelty. Usually what I will have is I'd have a steak about between 1 and 2 in the afternoon, and then maybe another steak, or like a half a steak in the morning, and then a full steak at night. So probably about, like, say 14-ounce steak at night and maybe 7 ounces, so 21 ounces of steak a day, something like that.
What about tea, coffee, and alcohol?
No alcohol, no tea. We started drinking some coffee once a day, once in the morning. And that's been kind of fun. We'll see how long that lasts. So an espresso in the morning, bacon and eggs. So that's been, and then I won't eat again until dinner time tonight, actually. So then it'll be a window of from night till morning. Or sometimes it's a window from noon till dinner. So I try to keep that window fairly small.
You do any fasting, extended fasting?
I have, but when I'm on the road, I kind of eat when I can.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there's nothing to eat. And so then I just eat when it's offered to me. And I would, for a year I ate once a day, but I was limiting my steak to a pound, and that wasn't enough. The doctors had told me, because I only had one kidney, that my creatinine levels were too high, but that's because I'm a carnivore. Your creatinine levels are high. But it was during the COVID lockdown, and I was all alone. My husband was gone, and you weren't really seeing anybody in person, and I didn't have good advice. So I ended up eating one steak a day. That was 16 ounces for a year. And at the end of that year, I saw another doctor, and they told me that actually they should be giving me cystatin C tests instead of creatinine tests to see the health of my remaining kidney. So the health of my remaining kidney is fine, and I can eat as much as I want. They wished I ate other things than meat, but that's not going to happen. So still I kind of get that pushback a little bit, that maybe, I had blood work done, and the doctor told me, some people can probably have this diet, but you're not suited to it. And so they like to dissuade me from what I'm doing, but I feel pretty good, actually.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous, yes.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about your work with Jordan and your travels. And
Yeah, that's been fun. And as long as it's fun, we'll continue to do it. We just finished, Jordan wrote this book, We Who Wrestle with God, and we've been traveling. We traveled for 5 months before Christmas, and now we've traveled, and now we're going to do 4 months on this side of it. So that'll be 9 months on that book. And then we're going to Europe, May and June. A week before we got the routing for Europe, Jordan and I were talking about how it would probably be good to go to Europe because Europe is needing some guidance.
mm-hmm.
And then the routing came and I said, okay, so I guess we're going to Europe. So we're going to Europe until June, and then we're going to take the summer off. And next fall, we'll go to Eastern Europe. And then next winter, we'll go to Australia. And I'm hoping that the next time that we travel, we'll do conferences in the States and in Canada and travel to other places. And so we'll limit our traveling a little bit in the States and have conferences instead. So we haven't tried that yet, but we're going to try that. That could be interesting because then if they're conferences, we can bring other speakers, and I think that would be good. And then also, if all of those people were together for a number of days, they can meet one another and they can discuss the questions. And I think that'll be good for people to be together, to get to know one another, community again,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that's necessary. So our travels are going well. Jordan and I, we discussed. Sometimes he doesn't tell me till 5 p.m. what he's going to talk about.
Uh-huh.
So then I have an hour.
Well,
So the other night, for instance, he told me he was going to talk about, he's going to talk about psychopathy and belief. So he was going to talk about trouble and belief. He's going to talk about psychopaths and narcissists and sadists and all of that. And I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to talk about? So I just wrote quite a bit about psychopathy so that I understood it.
mm-hmm.
And then I was sitting, the musician was on playing his music. I was sitting, and then it came to my mind, I could talk about the virtues that I wrote down once I had entered the church and how things changed. And I had written down with Jordan 30 virtues that had changed. So I got up on stage and I talked a little bit about, thanked everybody for coming, what I always do, and told them what was going to happen. And then I told them that Jordan was going to talk about psychopathy and belief, and I would leave that to him. But I was going to tell them what happened to me when I entered the church. And so I talked about all of God's graces that came my way once I'd entered the church, and we identified about 30 of them, which is good. And so and it's different every night.
Yeah.
We had 3 talks in a row. The first night Jordan talked about sacrifice, voluntary sacrifice, but he talked biblically. So he was talking about all the biblical stories. And then the next night he talked about voluntary sacrifice, and he talked biologically and psychologically. And then last night we were in Pensacola the last night. And that's when it was psychopathy and belief. So then that was a very psychological and biology-based talk. And I think it was good, because he really understands psychology and biology. He can really speak very clearly about that,
Mm-hmm.
deeply about that. And we were traveling with Jonathan Pajot, who is a very versed in speaking about biblical stories and understands the patterns in the Bible. And so those two went together pretty well because they could meet in the biblical stories after. So Jordan spoke for 40 minutes, and then they talked for 20 minutes, and then I came in and I asked questions from the crowd, and I like to choose maybe a biblical question, Question from the country we're in or the city that we're in. A family question, usually something about either children or raising children or marriage or something of that sort, and then maybe one funny question, about what kind of steak is your best kind of steak, or just something that's light.
Do you think that Christ and carnivore can come together?
Well, I wonder, in the beginning, when in the Bible, in the story of Cain and Abel, God looks on Cain and finds his offering wanting, but he celebrates Abel's offering. And what was Abel offering?
The lamb?
Yeah. So I don't know if there's meaning in that, but maybe there is.
Yeah, I think the strength of the lion and carnivore all sort of come together. And philosophically, it's truly we're working to inspire our brothers and sisters who think they're sheep, but they're lions.
Yes.
And through Christ and carnivore, it makes sense.
I think people will, I think that, I don't know, but I think that if people gave up plants and were eating this way, that they would be more likely to see Christ in their life.
I know it helped me.
Yeah, it helped you. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably helped me too.
Yeah. And once again, I think our brains are damaged, depressed, criminals, and everything we're talking about that we see in our human frailties has a lot to do with damage to our brains, which damages our psyche, our emotions, our hormones, and the function of everything in our bodies. And when we're not functioning properly, we get angry, depressed, sad, suicidal. And so everything comes down to, I think, an improper human diet that takes us away from our natural Christ-centered life in so many ways.
Yeah, because we can use sugar. We can use, when we feel empty, we can eat a candy and it fills it momentarily.
It's that opium and that release of that thing.
I think we'll look back and find out that it wasn't heroin that was the trouble, it was sugar.
Yeah, it's the plant, sugars, chemicals, antigens, and the fermentation, which makes the alcohol, which ultimately makes a mess inside our minds, from our mouth to our minds. And obviously, it's all a gut disease.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you wanted to speak about?
I kind of think that our grandfather, my dad, so the great-grandfathers of the time, I guess, their trouble was sugar, mainly. Now we've kind of figured out the sugar demon and what it's doing.
Yeah.
But our time, what we're going to be remembering is that this trouble between men and women, and this confusion between am I a woman or am I a man, that is going to be the what's remembered of our time. And so, we have to talk about this and try to make some inroads into understanding what has brought this about and what we can do to repair it.
And I think that carnivore is a huge improvement because it takes away the plant estrogens, androgens, progestins, and all the damaging to our brain and our reproductive organs and everything else. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. We agree.
It is such a pleasure, Tammy. God bless you and thank you. And always the best to you in your travels and helping teach us all.